That replace power switch volume control is working fine. I think I can call this tandem done. I'm taking a break to give you guys a progress update. Progress has been slower than I would like. I thought by pulling out the chassis from my tandem set, which is all original and restored, using it as a reference, things would go faster, but there's differences between these two. And it doesn't help that neither matches the service info entirely. Now the parts placement diagram, and I'm talking about the original FOCO service info. The parts placement diagram matches things pretty well. The problem comes from the schematic and the parts list. At least the scanned copy I have of the service info combines the 9L37, which is the chassis from the Holiday and the pedestal, with the 9L38, which is the chassis for the tandem. They combined it all into one, and they have separate schematics for the 9L37, the 9L38, so this is the 37, this is the 38, but they only have a parts list for the 37. And even though they're very similar, the parts are numbered differently. So that's not very useful. Because the only thing on the parts placement diagram is the part number. And if I use this part number, go and look in the parts list, it's not going to be the right value. So I have to match it up against the schematic. However, there are issues with the schematic. I'll give you a real simple example. Off a pin, this is the connector, the big connector on the back that the head unit plugs into. All right? What the heck is that? It's a resistor symbol. I can't quite make out the designator, R9 maybe, but there's no part value. And since the parts list I have is useless anyways, that doesn't tell me anything useful. Also on the parts placement diagram, some of the parts are so small, it's hard to tell what the values are or what the printing is. With that particular part, I ended up having to kind of guess on. I'm pretty sure I got it right, but I'm not 100% sure I got it right. I'm trying to find it on here. Also doesn't help that I have my chassis oriented upside down compared to this, because it's much easier to work on like this. But they printed out this diagram this way. Oh yeah, now I remember. It's there. It's in between E4 and R10. It's just sort of a weird smudge on there. But I believe it's that resistor, which is the 47K. Here's a couple other weird things. This doubled up ceramic cap, that is factory and that is original. I eventually figured out. On this, we have one cap. This, we have two, and hiding underneath was a resistor. That is a production change. They increased the value of this cap, but rather than putting in a single cap with the new value, they just put it one in parallel with it to increase the capacitance. Okay. And they also added this resistor, which required adding this little 2-lug terminal strip, which doesn't even exist on this one. So it's a little confusing, things like that. Some other very minor differences. There was a disc capacitor here, it was in pretty miserable shape, so I replaced it. Notice it's not here. And there are a few other little ceramic caps scattered around. Those are only used in the UHF models, the ones that have this copper box here. To filter out some extra high frequency noise, I presume. Another oddity. On this chassis, we have this little guy, this couplate resistor capacitor network. That is for vertical retrace suppression. It's a little pulse shaping network. Couple resistors, couple caps. This didn't have it. What it did have was a single resistor and 2 capacitors scattered around in this area. It's not in the documentation, but the resistors sure looked original, and the values match the discrete parts shown on the schematic. So I concluded this is an earlier revision, and they built, instead of using a couplate, they used discrete parts. It's this thing. And 1. So 1 resistor and 2 capacitors. And there are 1,000-volt caps, which I don't have on hand, not plastic film types. I looked up the specs on these guys, which are X1, Y1 type safety caps meant for use on the AC line, the mains. Turns out their DC voltage rating is 1,000 volts. The problem is the dielectric they use is terrible. It's fine for filtering noise, but the capacitance varies tremendously with temperature and the applied voltage. So I just tack these in so we can power the setup until the correct parts arrive. It's things like this that are slowing me down. I'm getting close though. I'm down to this terminal strip, and these 2 canned electrolytics. In anticipation of working on these sets, I found a good supplier of terminal strips, and I ordered up a bunch. So for example, this one has 4 isolated lugs and then a common ground lug. Perfect for this 4-section cap, so that's what I've been using on these sets. And I have all the electrolytics and everything ordered up to do all the remaining 21-inch sets that I have to work on. But no matter how carefully I've been planning these projects out, things like this network trip me up. I didn't realize I would need some 1,000-volt caps. I typically buy 630-volt caps. That's all. This is why this is taking forever. There's one last thing of interest. I was wondering what the heck this big blue cap was. That is now replaced by this little guy. So even though this is a modern-ish cap, from 1983 it looks like, things have gotten a lot smaller even since then. It's also not the right capacitance value. 150, so it's double the capacitance it needs to be, which also accounts for it being much larger. And they glued it in place. Luckily, I guess this is like Gorilla Glue or something. Luckily, that's separated easily. And we now have this little... And here's another one of those UHF-only caps that's supposed to be in there. So that's all good. Well, I finished recapping the chassis, put in good tubes, fired it up, and I am able to get a raster, but absolutely no video coming through onto the screen. I've tried injecting it directly into the IF board, and I've tried injecting composite video right into the grid of the video amp. There's nothing coming through to the screen. So I took a look inside. Remember, there is a circuit, there's a video amp inside the CRT housing. It's a pain in the butt to get to. You gotta take the whole thing apart. But here she is, and it hasn't been recapped. There's one electrolytic, and one huge paper cap, a smaller one, and a 3 BZ6. So I'm hoping recapping and putting in a good tube, if this one's bad, will do the trick. At least I can fire it back up without having to put everything back together. But you do also have to do something about that. There is a safety AC interlock on the CRT housing. There's also a little schematic of the video amp inside the CRT housing. So you need to pop this on to complete the circuit, like so. Or you could short it out, I imagine, with jumper wire. Just be careful, of course, because that is the AC line voltage right there. Let's see, we got a little label here. Lumaray. I imagine that's a rebuild. 21 FDP4, that is. That's the good stuff. That's what you want to find in these. Yeah, recapping that little board took care of the problem, and I gotta say I'm really impressed with the image quality on both these tandem sets I'm working on. It's really done. I don't see any degradation from having to go through that 25-foot cable. They both work great. Of course, having new picture tubes doesn't hurt. So the last issue with both of these tandem heads is they're wobbly. This one especially so. I think I'm going to have to, I think there are screws from the bottom going up through the wood base, and I'm going to have to tear off the felt, unfortunately, that's underneath the wood to get at the screws, because, yeah, I can't leave it like that. It's even worse rocking front to back. It's something that's really loosened up. And you can imagine from these things getting knocked around for decades that naturally things will loosen up. And of course, got to clean the screen cover and reinstall it. This one was really grungy on the inside, so I'm still working on that. Here it is. After last night, I was working on it for about an hour and gave up on it. I got to get back to it. It's thick. It's thick. And both these screen covers have shrunk a bit. So this one, it turns out that they did a bad job when they replaced the picture tube of reassembling it, so they'll take care of the problem. But on this one, because the screen cover is shrunk, it presses up against the glass and leaves these characteristic marks on the inside. So I was thinking, well, how can I increase the gap between the two? And what I'm going to try doing is I want to push the CRT back further. So it has a strap around the perimeter, and then there's sort of these straps that go around the back, and there are these curved pieces, two at the top, two at the bottom. I want to push the whole picture tube that way. So I think what I'll do is I'll loosen up these straps on the back. They have screws about that long, so you got a lot to play with. I could loosen these up quite a bit, loosen up the band around it, and put a little shim in here. Push it back 1/8 of an inch or so. Can't go too far because then the back of the CRT will bump into the cover. But I just want to get it back a little bit, and it seems to me that's the easiest way to do it. You can't. There's no play with the plastic shell that goes over this. It screws into this steel band, and the screws don't have any. They're not slotted or anything, so you can't position anything. So it seems to me pushing the CRT back is really the only way to go. Well, it turns out that there are 3 little screws that hold the felt base on, so I don't have to tear anything apart after all. And removing those reveals the screws I need to tighten down, and it also gives me a chance to clean off the remainder of this cable that I couldn't get at when the base was assembled. Well, it turns out I was wrong about why the base was wobbly. It's not that the screws holding the wooden base to the collar were loose. It's that there's an adapter that goes between the wood and this sturdy cast metal collar, and that is not very thin. Sorry, it's not very thick sheet metal, and that's where the screws actually attach. And they had deformed this plate. With the help of this pony clamp, I was able to get an edge of the clamp on that collar and tighten down right where the screws go in, and was able to push it back into place. If it wasn't for this cable, I could unmount the whole adapter and flatten it out, but I'm not going to disconnect this whole cable and pull the thing through. So I just about got it done. There's 3 of them. There's one on the back side, and it needs to get flattened out a little bit. while I got this apart, I'll clean up all the goo in here. This little guy, if you're wondering, is an RCA jack, so you can hook up a speaker to go with your mobile CRT head unit. There we go, piece of cake. Actually, it took me 2 evenings to do this, and almost done with the other one. So I polished up the screen cover, putting in that felt and pushing the CRT back a little seems to have done the trick. Otherwise there'd be marks where the plastic was touching the glass on the inside. So I put the band back on and put the arms back on. Put a little grease down in there so the handle swings nice, and put on some reproduction brass end caps for a nice finishing touch, and of course cleaned all this up with Novus plastic polish. So, use some Oz and Gojo and whatnot to clean up the base. So it's mahogany base, and the blondes usually came with this gold painted one, so that one will just clean up. And I'll do the same thing on this one. Push it back a little bit, although I don't think this one was touching. I think it was just because it was installed badly. That was the one I had a reseat. But I'll make sure that it's not touching before I close this one back up, otherwise it's all the same process. And then finally on to the cabinets. Boy, things are getting a little cramped in here as I get ready for all these sets to go away in less than a week. Here is the Mahogany Tandem. Just finished putting the cabinet back together. It is in phenomenal condition. Now, these sets are pretty uncommon, maybe borderline rare, so I've had the pleasure of working on half a dozen. This is the nicest. The original faux finish is almost flawless. Grill cloth, all the knobs, the UHF knob, everything is just really, really sweet. So, last thing to do is put the screws in the back and plug into the CRT, and well, of course make sure it all still works. Now, I did test the chassis just before I slid it in. For all the hassle these things are, I gotta say, having that the plug on the cable is kind of handy at times, because you can leave the CRT 20 feet away while you're working on the cabinet. But man, that is gorgeous with a capital G. I am jealous, to say the least. The fun never ends with these sets. A really common failure point, especially in the 21-inch sets, is the on-off switch. And most of the sets I've done for this owner, they've been replaced, and this one is no exception. They did it in an interesting fashion. It seemed to have epoxied a switch onto the back. The original is push on, push off. This was a pull on, pull off, but it wasn't feeling right. The volume control is not rotating very well, so we get hung up halfway through the rotation. And now the power switch has just completely fused, so I can't turn the set on anymore. So I've had it with screwing around with this control. I dug through my stash of scavenged parts, and I happen to have a used one, but it's already had the back switch replaced, and it is good. Whoever did it, so that's the problem with rebuilding controls, is they're typically held together with tabs of metal that are bent over. You flex them once or twice, and metal fatigue sets in and they snap off. So they did a nice job of repairing it, where they soldered the tabs back on, and it's on there really solidly. And like I said, it's good, as are both the pots. So I'm going to disconnect all the wires that go to this and swap this guy in, and see if we get the set working again. Alright, the replacement power switch volume control did the trick. I am very glad to get this guy done. These tandems are not the easiest sets to work on. I still have one more to go, but it's almost done too. Let's take another look around the cabinet. It says a UHF option. The original knob is in great shape. All the knobs are in great shape. Even the original antennas here. You just don't find them like this every day, that's for sure. Screen was a bit of a challenge to clean. It had some really bad marks on the inside. It did take some scrubbing with Novus number 2, numerous rounds to get that off, but it's looking fine now. So that's going to be it for this tandem. Next up, putting the blonde back together.